There is a number I need you to hold in your head for the next 20 minutes. $150 million every single day. That is how much extra money Vladimir Putin is making right now because of what is happening in the Strait of Hormuz. Not from his own doing, not from anything his military planned or executed. Simply because a narrow strip of water, 34 kilometers wide at its tightest point, a strip of water on the other side of the world from Ukraine, has been effectively shut down. And every day it stays shut, every day those mines sit in the bottom of the Gulf and keep the tankers away, $150 million flows into Russia's war chest, into the salaries of the soldiers fighting in eastern Ukraine, into the ammunition being fired at Ukrainian cities, into the machinery of a war that was supposed to be over 4 years ago. Now here's the part that changes everything. Ukraine figured this out. And Ukraine, a country that is still fighting for its own survival against a Russian invasion, has just made a move in the Strait of Hormuz that is so strategically precise, so unexpected, that even the United States didn't see it coming. The UK is right there alongside them. And if this deployment goes ahead, and all signs say it will, Vladimir Putin is about to watch his $150 million daily windfall start evaporating. I'm Flash America, and this is the story underneath the story that almost nobody is connecting right now. Let's start with the Strait of Hormuz itself, because the scale of what has happened there since February 28, 2026 is not fully understood by most people who are following this conflict. The strait is 34 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. That is it, 34 kilometers of water between Iran and Oman. And through that narrow corridor, before the war started, around 3,000 vessels transited every single month. That traffic carried 20% of the world's entire oil supply, 20% of global liquefied natural gas, and up to 30% of the world's internationally traded fertilizers. The Strait of Hormuz is not just an energy corridor. It is a choke point for the entire functioning of the global economy. Right now, that traffic has collapsed to around 5% of pre-war levels. The International Energy Agency has officially called this the largest supply disruption in the history of the global oil market. Not one of the largest, the largest, ever. Bigger than the 1973 oil shock, bigger than any energy crisis the modern world has previously experienced. And the effects have cascaded across every continent simultaneously. Brent crude surged past $120 a barrel in the early weeks of the war. Gas prices in the United States crossed $4 a gallon for the first time in years. Europe's LNG prices nearly doubled. Airlines started adding fuel surcharge fees on every ticket. Countries like Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Vietnam declared fuel emergencies. Gulf states that depend on the strait for more than 80% of their food imports started airlifting basic staples because supermarket shelves were going empty. This is not a regional problem. This is not a Middle East problem. This is a problem that touches every economy on Earth. And the question that every government, every defense ministry, every shipping company has been asking since day one is the same question. Who is going to fix it? The answer that emerged this week was not the one anyone predicted. It was Ukraine. Yes, Ukraine, the country that has spent the last 4 years fighting off a Russian invasion with drones, courage, and a level of improvisation that has genuinely rewritten the rulebook for modern warfare. That country is now preparing to send its naval vessels thousands of miles from its own borders to clear mines from the world's most important energy choke point. And the United Kingdom is standing right beside them, making sure it actually happens. When I first tracked this story and started working through the details of what Ukraine actually has sitting in Portsmouth right now, I understood immediately why defense analysts and naval experts have been so emphatic about this deployment. Because what Ukraine has committed is not symbolic. These are not patrol boats. These are purpose-built, NATO-trained, sophisticated mine warfare platforms. And together, the 4 vessels currently docked in Portsmouth represent one of the most capable mine countermeasures packages that any country outside of a major naval power could put into the field right now. Let me walk you through what Ukraine actually has, because this matters. The first 2 ships are the Cherna and the Chessie, formerly known in Royal Navy service as HMS Grimsby and HMS Shoreham. Both are Sandown-class single-role mine hunters built by Vosper Thornycroft and commissioned in the early 2000s. They are 52.5 meters long, displace 600 tons, and have a draft of just 2.3 meters. That shallow draft is not a minor detail. It means these ships can work effectively in the coastal and semi-enclosed waters of the Gulf without losing stability in open ocean conditions, which is exactly the operational environment they would face in the Strait. These ships are not fast. Their top speed is 13 knots, but speed is completely irrelevant when your mission is to hover almost stationary above something dangerous and neutralize it with precision. What makes these vessels genuinely formidable is their detection technology. The primary system is the Sonar 193M variable depth sonar, and the reason this particular sonar is so critical for Hormuz operations is right there in the name: variable depth. The transducer head can be detached from the hull and lowered on a cable to different depths, optimizing acoustic performance based on water temperature gradients and thermoclines in the water column below. This matters enormously in the Gulf, where shallow, warm water creates complicated sound propagation conditions that a fixed hull sonar would struggle to deal with. The detachable head solves that problem directly. And one of these ships, the Cherna, formerly HMS Shoreham, has been in Middle East waters before. In 2018, it began a 3-year deployment to the region specifically tasked with securing shipping lanes for merchant vessels. It knows those waters. It has operated in those acoustic conditions. That experience is not nothing. The other two vessels are the Mariupol and the Melitopol, both Alkmaar-class, also known as tripartite-class mine hunters, donated to Ukraine by the Belgian and Dutch navies. These ships carry a fascinating Cold War history. The tripartite design emerged from a 1973 agreement between Belgium, France, and the Netherlands, where each country took responsibility for a different component of the shared design. France supplied the mine-hunting electronics. Belgium managed electrical systems and navigation. The Netherlands handled propulsion. The result was around 40 hulls across 3 fleets and one of the very rare, genuine examples of multinational shared naval construction from the Cold War era. They measure 51.5 meters, displace around 510 tons, and carry comparable mine hunting and neutralization systems. All 4 vessels are currently docked in Portsmouth. All 4 crews have completed their NATO interoperability assessments. The Ukrainian Navy has confirmed the crews are trained and ready, and the Netherlands is expected to deliver a 5th vessel to Ukraine in June 2026, to be commissioned as the Henichesk. Ukraine's mine countermeasures fleet is not shrinking, it is growing. Now here is why all of that capability matters specifically in Hormuz right now. Because the mine threat in that waterway is not theoretical. It is documented, it is active, and it is getting worse. On April 10th, the New York Times reported, citing U.S. officials, that Iran was struggling to reopen the strait partly because the IRGC itself had lost track of exactly where all of its own mines were laid. Let that land for a moment. Iran laid so many mines so quickly in the early chaos of the war that its own forces cannot fully account for their placement. And then on April 23rd, Axios confirmed something that pushed the situation from serious to genuinely alarming. The IRGC had started actively laying new mines in the strait again. Fresh mine-laying operations confirmed by a U.S. official and a separate source with direct knowledge, at a moment when a ceasefire is technically still in place. That prompted President Trump to post on Truth Social on April 23rd, ordering the U.S. Navy to shoot and kill any Iranian boat caught laying mines, his words, with no hesitation. He also ordered U.S. minesweeping operations to continue at tripled capacity and confirmed that the USS Chief and the USS Pioneer, 2 U.S. Navy mine countermeasure vessels, were already operating in the strait, alongside underwater drones and specialist mine-hunting helicopters. But the Pentagon itself acknowledged the brutal reality of the timeline. Clearing the mines from the Strait of Hormuz could take up to 6 months. 6 months. And the U.S. Navy is already stretched thin across multiple simultaneous operational theaters in the region. This is precisely where Ukraine's 4 mine hunters stop being a diplomatic gesture and start being a genuine operational necessity. The mines Iran has deployed are not the old-fashioned contact variety that sailors from a century ago would recognize. Analysts have identified 2 primary types the IRGC has laid. The Mahom 3 uses a combination of acoustic and magnetic sensors to detect passing vessels and carries a 300-kilogram warhead that can be submerged up to 100 meters below the surface. The Mahom 7 is slightly lighter, at 220 kilograms of warhead, designed for shallower water, and critically, it has a conical shape specifically engineered to resist standard sonar detection. Both detonate automatically when their sensors are triggered. No contact required. You don't have to hit them, you just have to get close enough. And according to The Guardian, despite the significant losses Iran's conventional navy suffered in the early strikes of the war, it still retains between 80 and 90% of its small boats and mine-laying vessels. It has the means to keep laying them. It has been laying them. And Trump has ordered American forces to shoot any boat they catch doing it. The variable depth sonar on Ukraine's Sandown-class ships is specifically configured to hunt mines at the depths where the Mahom 3 operates. The detachable sonar head that can be lowered deep into the warm, acoustically complex Gulf waters is not a convenience feature. It is the difference between finding the mine and sailing over it without knowing it's there. Italy has now confirmed it is assembling a package of 4 vessels for the coalition: 2 minesweepers, an escort vessel, and a logistics ship. NBC News and Reuters reported Italy's Navy chief stating clearly that his country would not be acting alone and that other nations would also send minesweepers. The coalition to clear Hormuz is forming around Ukraine's commitment. Kyiv moved first. Kyiv declared readiness first at the April 22nd summit at Northwood. And every nation that has followed is building on the framework Ukraine established. Over 36 countries have now signed a joint statement expressing readiness to contribute and condemning Iranian attacks on commercial shipping. France and the UK jointly declared on April 17th that they would establish an international defensive mission for the Strait once a sustainable ceasefire is in place. But it was Ukraine, a country still fighting for its own survival on its own soil, that stood up first and said, "We are ready." That is not just operationally significant, that is historically significant. And the reason it is historically significant connects directly to the second dimension of this story, the one that explains why Putin woke up to this news and felt it like a punch straight to his treasury. When you first hear that Ukraine is sending mine hunters to the Strait of Hormuz, the obvious question is, what does a mine-clearing operation in the Persian Gulf have to do with the war in eastern Ukraine? The answer, once you trace it through carefully, is everything. Let me give you the economic context first, because without it, the connection doesn't fully click into place. By February 2026, Russia's war economy was genuinely starting to buckle. Western sanctions were biting harder. Ukrainian drone strikes on Russian energy infrastructure were relentless. The G7 price cap on Russian oil was tightening. The International Energy Agency's data shows that Russia's oil and petroleum export revenues had fallen to just $9.5 billion in February 2026, the lowest level since Putin launched the full-scale invasion in 2022. Russian oil export volumes had dropped to 6.6 million barrels per day, also the lowest since 2022. Ukrainian drone and missile strikes on the Baltic ports of Primorsk and Ust-Luga and operations across the Black Sea had cut Russian oil export volumes by as much as 40%, according to Reuters. Russia's GDP had contracted in the early months of 2026. The IMF's full-year forecast for Russian growth was just 0.8%. Bankruptcies in Russia rose by 31% in 2025 to 568,000 cases. The Russian central bank was keeping interest rates stubbornly high to fight inflation running above 10% in key sectors. According to Chatham House's analysis published on April 10th, Putin was facing a moment where he might be forced to make real concessions in Ukraine peace negotiations simply because Russia's economy could no longer sustain military spending at its current level without sacrificing public welfare. Ukraine was winning the economic attrition battle, slowly, painfully, but winning. And then, on February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched their operation against Iran. And everything changed for Putin overnight. Iran's closure of the Strait of Hormuz triggered the largest oil supply shock in the history of the global market. Brent crude surged past $100 a barrel, then pushed toward $120. The Financial Times calculated that by early March, Russia was earning an extra $150 million per day from its oil sales, purely because of the price spike caused by the Hormuz closure. A senior fellow at the Carnegie Russia-Eurasia Center, Sergei Vakwenko, told CNBC that Russia's total windfall from the energy price surge ran into the billions of dollars within weeks. The key post, citing Financial Times calculations, confirmed that Moscow had already received between $1.3 billion and $1.9 billion in additional oil export tax revenues in just the first 2 weeks after the Hormuz disruption began. Russian crude, which had been selling at a discount to Brent for years, was suddenly, in some cases, being sold to India at a premium to Brent, reversing years of price dynamics in a matter of days. Countries that had been dutifully reducing their Russian oil purchases under Western pressure were suddenly scrambling to buy whatever they could get because Gulf supply had gone offline. Chatham House described the U.S.-Iran war plainly as an economic gift for Putin. One Russian analyst quoted in that piece said that before the war, Putin was basically pawning Russia's future to fund the military. With the Hormuz windfall, he no longer had to do that, at least not for now. So hold those numbers together. $150 million per day. Every single day the strait stays closed. Every week of Hormuz's closure is effectively over $1 billion of extra capacity for Russia's war machine. That is not an abstraction. That is a direct financial pipeline from Iran's mine-laying strategy to the soldiers on the front lines in eastern Ukraine, to the ammunition being fired at Ukrainian cities. Ukraine understands this completely. That is exactly why President Zelensky moved so fast, why Ukraine was the first nation to declare readiness at the April 22nd Northwood Summit before any other country announced anything. Because Ukraine has been attacking Russia's energy export infrastructure with drones for months, precisely because it understands that hitting Russia's oil revenues is as strategically effective as hitting its ammunition depots. Ukrainian drone strikes on Primorsk, Ust-Luga, and Black Sea export facilities had been steadily squeezing Russian oil export volumes. Ukraine was winning that campaign. And then the Hormuz closure wiped out much of that progress overnight by sending global oil prices so high that Russia's remaining exports became dramatically more profitable than before. Sending mine hunters to clear Hormuz is Ukraine continuing the exact same economic attrition strategy, just deployed on a global stage instead of a regional one. When those mines are cleared, shipping resumes, global oil supply increases, prices fall, and Russia loses its windfall. The math is as simple as it is devastating for Moscow. But there is a second dimension to this that goes beyond the economics. And I think it is actually more significant in the long run. Right now, Turkey's invocation of the Montreux Convention means Ukraine cannot send naval vessels into the Black Sea. For Putin, that has always felt like an implicit ceiling on Ukrainian naval ambition. Russia devastated Ukraine's conventional Black Sea fleet in the opening phases of the war. Ukraine rebuilt its naval capability through unmanned surface vehicles and drone warfare, forcing the retreat of Russia's Black Sea fleet from Crimea without ever needing traditional warships. But the Montreux Convention still technically capped what Ukraine could project in terms of conventional naval power. Now Ukraine is about to send mine hunters to the Persian Gulf, thousands of miles from the Black Sea, thousands of miles from the front lines, coordinating with the Royal Navy, operating alongside French vessels, working with Italian ships, building defense partnerships with Gulf Arab states through 10-year agreements that Zelensky himself confirmed include Ukrainian sea drones. Putin invaded Ukraine expecting to neutralize a regional military power in a matter of days. Instead, he created something he never anticipated, a combat-hardened, globally connected naval and drone warfare power that can now project operational capability into the Persian Gulf. Ukraine does not need the Black Sea to hurt Russia's war effort anymore. It can do it from Hormuz. That is the message this deployment sends. And Putin, who has been watching the Hormuz closure as a financial lifeline, is now watching the coalition forming to cut that lifeline. A coalition that Ukraine is leading from British ports with British-built ships crewed by Ukrainian sailors trained by the Royal Navy. Now let's talk about the timeline, because this is the question everyone who's been following the story wants answered. When do those ships actually leave Portsmouth? The honest answer, based on everything currently known, is this. The deployment is ready. The crews are trained. The ships are prepared. The coalition planning is done. The only thing standing between those 4 vessels in the Strait of Hormuz is the political and military situation in the Middle East. And right now, that situation is sitting on a knife's edge. Both the UK and France have been absolutely explicit on this point. Neither country is willing to send ships into the strait while there remains a meaningful probability that full-scale conflict restarts. The ceasefire brokered by Pakistan on April 8th is technically still in place as of late April. Trump extended it indefinitely on April 21st to give Iran time to submit a new proposal. But let me tell you what that ceasefire actually looks like in practice, because the word ceasefire is doing a lot of heavy lifting to describe a situation that is anything but calm. The IRGC laid fresh mines in the strait as recently as April 23rd, confirmed by Axios, citing a U.S. official. Iran seized two commercial vessels, the MSC Francesca and the Apamondas, in the waterway on April 22nd. U.S. forces have physically turned back or redirected 38 ships attempting to enter or leave Iranian waters since the naval blockade began on April 13th. Trump ordered U.S. minesweepers to triple their clearing operations. The U.S. Navy seized an Iranian cargo ship on April 19th. 3 aircraft carriers are now positioned in the Middle East simultaneously, something that has not happened since 2003. And Israel's defense minister stated publicly on April 23rd that Israel is prepared to renew the war and is waiting only for a green light from Washington. That is what a ceasefire looks like in the Strait of Hormuz in 2026. The peace talks are not providing much reassurance either. The first round of direct U.S.-Iran negotiations in Islamabad on April 11th lasted 21 hours and ended without agreement. The second round was supposed to happen, but Trump canceled his delegation's trip on April 25th, citing what he called tremendous infighting and confusion within Tehran's leadership. Iran's foreign minister, Araghchi, left Pakistan and flew to Oman, then back to Pakistan, then to Russia in a 48-hour diplomatic sprint. Pakistan took down all its security checkpoints at the Islamabad summit venue, a visible signal that nobody expected talks to resume imminently. Iran's latest proposal attempts to decouple the strait from the nuclear question, offering to open the waterway in exchange for lifting the naval blockade while pushing nuclear negotiations to a separate, later phase. Trump has indicated that is almost certainly not enough. The core American demand remains a permanent, verifiable end to Iranian nuclear enrichment. That is not something any faction within Iran's current fractured leadership has publicly agreed to. Until there is a genuine, durable agreement on that foundational issue, the ceasefire remains fragile, the strait remains effectively closed, and Ukraine's mine hunters remain in Portsmouth. But here is what matters about the timeline once conditions do change. The moment a real, lasting ceasefire clicks into place, the sequence that follows moves faster than most people realize. This mission does not need to be planned from scratch. It was planned at Northwood on April 22nd. 30 nations contributed to that planning session. Ukraine's specific role is already mapped. The UK and France are coordinating the mission framework. Italy has its 4-vessel package committed. The Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, which have advanced mine countermeasure capabilities developed specifically for NATO operations, are also in the discussion. The intelligence picture of where Iran's mines are located has been built continuously by U.S. underwater drones, satellite surveillance, and maritime patrol aircraft operating over the strait for weeks. When the signal comes that it is safe to deploy, these ships do not start from zero. They execute a plan that is already largely written. Defense One noted specifically that the detachable sonar systems on Ukraine's Sandown-class vessels are configured for the precise acoustic conditions of the Gulf's warm, shallow, thermocline-heavy waters. These ships are not being sent to improvise. They are being sent to execute. And then consider what happens to that $150 million per day Russian windfall the moment shipping resumes. Oil prices fall. The global energy crisis that has been building since February 28th begins to decompress. Petrol prices in the United States, which have climbed over $1 per gallon since the war started, begin to ease. European LNG prices start correcting downward. Asian economies that have been scrambling for alternative energy sources get breathing room, and Russia's windfall starts evaporating. According to Chatham House's analysis, the sustained decline in global oil demand that tends to follow extended periods of high prices could ultimately push oil back toward $50 a barrel or below over the longer term, at precisely the moment Russia is dealing with production constraints, sanctions pressure, and physical export limitations from Ukrainian drone strikes. Chatham House described that scenario as potentially devastating for Russia's budget in the medium term. Ukraine reopening Hormuz does not just inconvenience Putin. Sustained over time, it strikes at the financial foundation of his ability to keep the war going. There's one more dimension to this story that I want to make sure lands before we close, because it matters beyond the military and economic calculus. For years, Ukraine was seen by much of the world, including some of its Western partners, primarily as an aid recipient, a country that needed weapons, needed money, needed political support, needed everything. What is happening right now is a fundamental transformation of that identity. Ukraine is transitioning from the country that needed help to the country that can provide help on a global stage. Ukraine is not waiting to be asked. It volunteered. It deployed its expertise. It signed 10-year defense agreements with Gulf states. It is becoming, right now in real time, a genuine defense and security partner that other nations want on their side. And that transformation has direct consequences for what Ukraine can negotiate in terms of long-term security guarantees, weapons deals, economic partnerships, and political standing in every room it walks into from this point forward. When those 4 ships finally leave Portsmouth, when they pass through the Suez Canal and into the Red Sea and then into the Gulf of Oman, they will be carrying something more important than sonar equipment and mine disposal vehicles. They will be carrying proof that a country that was supposed to have been broken 4 years ago is now operating on the global stage in ways that even its closest allies did not fully anticipate. Putin launched what he called a special military operation in February 2022, expecting it to last a few days. He did not plan for Ukrainian sailors training in Portsmouth to one day deploy to the Persian Gulf to dismantle his oil windfall. He did not plan for Zelensky to sign defense agreements with Gulf states that include Ukrainian sea drones. He did not plan for any of this. Ukraine is turning that miscalculation into a global strategic asset, one mine hunter deployment at a time. And $150 million per day less for Russia's war machine. That is what happens when those ships reach the Strait. I'm Flash America. If this connected dots that you weren't seeing anywhere else, subscribe to the channel right now. Hit the notification bell. The story's moving fast, and you need to be here for every update as the Hormuz situation develops and Ukraine's deployment gets closer. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Ukraine's mine hunters make it to the Strait? And when they do, how long before Putin feels it? I'll see you in the next one.